Throughout the 200-year history of public schooling, a widely scattered group of critics have pointed out that the education of young beings should involve much more than simply molding them into future workers or citizens. Educational pioneers all insisted that education should be understood as the art of cultivating the moral, emotional, physical, psychological, and spiritual dimensions of the developing child. During the 1970s, emerging body of literature in science, philosophy, and cultural history provided an overarching concept to describe this way of understanding education, a perspective known as holism. A holistic way of thinking seeks to integrate multiple layers of meaning and experience rather than defining human possibilities narrowly. Every child is more than a future employee. Every person's intelligence and abilities are far more complex than his or her scores on standardized tests. I love this statement from Miller's A Brief Introduction to Holistic Education. Having grown up in the public education system, it's all I ever knew. I was not exposed to holistic learning. Montessori, Reggio, or Waldorf, that was for the hippie parents. Blend that with my Roman Catholic upbringing, there was not much room for diversity and integration in education. My children's school principal, Merrill Matthews, saw something else. He inspired not only children to become the best version of themselves they could be, but parents too. He was an inspiration to many people. My boys, Mason 9 and Avery 12, began to experience and develop a passion for education that had been missing, something I had never seen, a spark, a light, a je ne sais quoi. As a parent of two boys, I've begun to see a whole other side of the educational universe. Gratefully, I was able to see it as Avery entered grade 7 and Mason entered grade 4, and there was still time on my side to be an involved parent. This foreign concept partially brought me back to UOIT so that I can further assist in their educational development. After 20 years as a paramedic, 12 as an advanced care, with some time as a flight paramedic, it was time to go deeper. Recent experiences with my own mental health challenges in 2016 opened up my mind and consciousness to a far greater understanding of what we are capable of achieving, if only limited by our own thoughts and understanding. I have passionately latched on to the growth mindset concepts by Carol Dweck and begun to apply it in my own daily living. That we must praise the effort and not the child. For myself, I praise my own efforts and I forgive myself when I don't get things right. That all my failures are here to move me forward further in life. The successes were a source of ego. I began to see overlap with the Mental Health Commission's paramedic PTSD resiliency education based in mindfulness practices. I followed it downstream to how it could prevent mental health in children, getting ahead of the teenage wave of anxiety that is becoming more prevalent, especially in my line of work. Following physiological and psychological components of PTSD, I began to see common themes emerge and overlap of Stuart Shanker's self-regulation efforts. Much of paramedic work is built on the sympathetic nervous system, and an acute exposure to trauma has everlasting effects on the body. The limbic systems, parasympathetic nervous systems, and prefrontal cortex have many neural pathways required for education, the triune brain and its relationship to cognitive learning. When I applied for this course, I did not anticipate the learning curve I was going to experience. The result was a triad of courses that all shared similarities of interest: foundations of adult education, social determinants of health, and holistic learning in children. Social determinants of health discusses how the determinants create a sympathetic response in the body and causes other medical conditions. Foundations of Adult Learning discusses the philosophies of education. And holistic learning in children is about the combined affect of various learning methods that needs to be introduced into the public and Catholic education systems in Ontario. Where it all comes together for me, the practice of empathy and unlearn. Unlearn was introduced by my son's principal. Unlearn, by definition, is to discard something learned, especially a bad habit or false or outdated information, from one's memory. Where I've begun to understand it is in relation to education and psychology. We entrench neural pathways with educational dogma of material, data, and research, and then have difficulty changing our human patterns with a new concept when a new concept comes along that is equally or more beneficial. I had to unlearn my own subconscious beliefs of what education was to better support my children's social and emotional well-being. I was coming at every educational assignment with my own education schema, a product of the industrial school system of rote knowledge. How this applies to holistic learning is to remain totally devoid of bias, prejudices, and thought when learning, to allow the limbic brain to be calm so that it can be prepared to receive information. I'm fascinated with brain architecture, what is choice, and the idea of epigenetics, that we have an energy source within our minds, and like a binary code of ones and zeros, we can consciously activate and express DNA cells and heal ourselves through our cognitive abilities. How will our education system evolve? It has to come from those that are willing to be change makers, the people willing to stretch the possibilities and not fear evolution. There will be a combination of the different styles introduced, from Andrew Amelia, Montessori, and Waldorf, among others. There's also the Blue Sky School in Canada, Ontario, that introduces new ideas as a prototype school. I began to understand that changing the education system was like turning the Titanic around. It's a slow process of change that most parents and educators are resistant to do. The concept that satisfactory in grade 2 math will not define that student for the rest of their academic career life. It doesn't matter. The school system didn't cater to boys as it did for girls. Boys had to sit in their seats, as Michael Rice would say, and self-regulation was not a thing in the last decade of education. The principal idea is to engage the student in learning and allow them to follow their passions wherever they may lead them, so that they will be happy in life. We know too many people who are in unhappy jobs, unhappy lives, because a grade 10 guidance counselor in 1988 put them through a test and told them they couldn't be what they wanted to be. We were all products of the brutal industrial education system. What I believe I can determine is that the long-term intention of the Board of Education is to make educational learning an evidence-based practice. They don't know exactly what works, but will keep exploring different methods and help each child to become the best version of themselves and remain engaged in learning. We lose too many children in the early high school years to mental health challenges. As a paramedic, we call this evidence-based medicine, providing our best patient care practices on sound research and science that is continually evolving. And the moment it has evolved, we must not accept it as definite, but be prepared to unlearn it for the next possible patient and for improving our patient outcomes. In education, it cannot be said that teachers will use evidence-based practice every day. With 20-odd children per classroom, each child will learn differently, and no single method can be applied cross-sectionally. However, what will be identified is that children will have the ability to determine which type of learning will be best suited for them. Education in Ontario will move beyond rote memory learning that we were instructed with into inquiry-based learning for children, so they become passionate about education and prepare them to evolve into the project-based learners as teenagers. This prepares them to become lifelong learners as adults. The idea of education will be to fail big, learn from your mistakes, and be resilient from them. From that resiliency will grow social, emotional, empathetic students who have the ability to formulate understandings through natural curiosity and make the world a better place through their caring and friendships. I'm less angry with my children these days. I used to be angry for the trivial things that didn't matter. Then I realized, how could I be angry with them? They were only 9 and 12, and they only have 9 and 12 years of life experience behind them. I'm 42 years old, and I'm still making mistakes. Life unfolds in front of us as it's happening.